Normally in Metroidvanias, the world is segmented by a series of different kinds of locks that can only be opened by specific kinds of keys, which usually come in the form of abilities earned by character upgrades that you find by exploring the world. But Outer Wilds is a game that handles things differently. In this game, every ability you'll ever need to use is available more or less from the very start, so you instead open the game's locks and gain access to new areas, not by collecting upgrades, but by collecting information. So some people have dubbed Outer Wilds as a Metroidvania because all the upgrades are inside your brain. One of the biggest consequences of that is that once the knowledge enters your head, it's not going to leave unless you either get amnesia or just have really bad memory. And since knowledge is the only barrier to your progress, you can go straight to the end of the game in a matter of minutes if you know what to do. But the process of collecting the info you need to reach the end is the core of the game, so if you have the game spoiled for you, you literally cannot play it. I mean, technically you can, but the experience won't be the same because it's a game about learning, and spoiling it means that there won't be anything for you to learn. So, if you haven't played Outer Wilds for yourself, then I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to stop watching this video and not come back until you play it. You're only gonna get the chance to do it once, so don't rob yourself of that. I'm serious. Go play the game. Do it. You're not allowed to watch this until you do. If I find out that you saw this without playing Outer Wilds, I will come to your house. So, when you start the game, you wake up in your village on Timber Hearth, and the first thing you need to do is get the launch codes for your spaceship from a character named Hornfells. While you're trying to find your way to them, you'll likely encounter other characters along the way who will flesh out the culture of your little village and teach you some gameplay stuff that'll become important later. There's a tiny model ship you can fly, ostensibly to help you learn the flying controls for the real ship, but considering how easy it is to crash this thing, it seems like it's mainly there to put the fear of God in you so that you'll be more careful once you start flying the real thing. There's also a zero-gravity cave that acts as an optional tutorial for navigating zero-G in space, managing your fuel and whatnot, and there are other learning opportunities to be found in the Timberhearth village, whose practical applications are less immediately obvious. There's a patch of ghost matter that can teach you how the substance works and how to safely detect it with your little scout, which will be helpful for getting past clusters of ghost matter in other parts of the solar system. In the museum, you learn a decent amount of basic world-building info, but you also learn how gravity crystals and quantum mechanics work, both of which will become critical for navigating certain areas, as well as for solving certain puzzles. What's interesting about some of the keys you can find in this village, and in the rest of Outer Wilds too, is that it may not even be obvious that these are keys at all. In other Metroidvanias, when you find an upgrade, it's usually pretty clear that the thing you found is an upgrade, and it's also usually clear what that upgrade is meant to be used for. But it's up to you to remember the places where you can use it, and then decide where you want to go next. Outer Wilds hides its keys in plain sight, treating them like any other pieces of information you can find that may or may not have gameplay significance. So, when you encounter a lock that one of the keys you found can open, you have to put two and two together and figure out for yourself the way to get past that lock. You have to remember the things you've already seen and apply that knowledge to progress. And for some of your keys, even if you understand their surface level applications, they can still hide alternative applications that you may not initially be aware of. For example, your scout that you get at the start of the game seems like its main use is to just show you photos of areas you can't reach or are cautious of visiting, but you may not know that it's secretly a far more versatile tool than that. The scout can also act as a light source, which is far more powerful than your flashlight, and can be used to illuminate some of the game's darker environments. It also puts a marker on your heads-up display that shows you its location, which you can use to find hidden entrances to areas that would otherwise be inaccessible. When it comes to the Scout's photo-taking capabilities, I already mentioned how it can be used to help avoid ghost matter, but you can also use Scout photos to freeze quantum objects in place when you aren't looking at them directly, since observing a photo of one is the same as observing one directly. If you haven't played the game yet, I just spoiled that puzzle for you, and you should be ashamed of yourself. The signal scope is another key you get at the start that has surprising versatility, though not to the same extent. Tracking radio signals is pretty much the only thing it can do, but you can use that one feature in a few different ways. You can track distress beacons, quantum fluctuations, and musical instruments being played by your fellow astronauts, and it ends up being necessary for solving some puzzles, particularly in Dark Bramble. What's important here is the fact that it's not enough to visit certain locations to get the keys you need, but that you also have to develop a stronger understanding of the keys themselves at times. The Scout is a key that you get given very early on, but you can't use it to its fullest until you learn all the ways that it can be used. So it's really more like 4 or 5 keys in one. Outer Wilds won't force you to go to any specific planet first, but it will lightly nudge you towards going to Giant's Deep as your first stop. After all, the first thing you see when you wake up at the beginning of the game, as well as at the beginning of every time loop, is a strange flash of light in the sky happening on a structure orbiting around Giant's Deep, which seems to send some blue glowing thing out into space. This is meant to entice you into trying to find out what that's all about, and some of the Hearthians you can talk to in the starting village will suggest going to Giant's Deep first as well. If you do go there first, you can find the character Gabbro, who can teach you how to meditate until the start of the next loop, just in case you get stuck somewhere and want to start over instantly. You can also find the Statue Workshop, which hints towards the reason why you're in a time loop, and towards the purpose of the Ash Twin Project, the game's primary mystery. You can go to the Tower of Quantum Trials, which will teach you the rule of quantum imaging, which you'll need to know if you want to land on the strange quantum moon that appears in the sky above multiple planets. But Giant's Deep doesn't just contain answers, it also poses questions of its own. Questions like, how do I get past this water barrier beneath the waves? If you want to find your first lead for answering that question, you can go to the construction yard, which might make you more curious to visit the probe cannon orbiting around the planet, and might also get you curious about visiting Brittle Hollow, where the game is hiding a whole bunch of important information about the Nomai civilization, much of which will be critical to reaching the endgame. Giant's Deep also houses a brambly island with a chunk of ice that has a huge jellyfish frozen inside of it, which gives you a hint about where the lost pilot Feldspar might be located. Pursuing that lead will eventually reveal the secret to getting past the electric barrier, which is beneath the planet's water barrier, so that you can descend down to the core of Giant's Deep itself, which holds one of the most important keys in the entire game, the coordinates for the Eye of the Universe. Brittle Hollow is one of the most information-dense planets in Outer Wilds, arguably rivaled only by Ember Twin. You have the Old Settlement, which shows you that the Nomai arrived in your solar system after their vessel became ensnared in Dark Bramble, and 3 escape pods were launched from it, with one pod landing here, another landing on Ember Twin, and the third never escaping Dark Bramble. If you realize that the escape pods found here and on Ember Twin both have distress beacons, which are sending out a radio signal that you can pick up with your signal scope, you can use that knowledge to find the third escape pod inside Dark Bramble by following the signal, which will eventually lead you to the vessel proper. Aside from the Old Settlement, the other major Nomai dwelling on Brittle Hollow was the Hanging City, which contains a whole bunch of lore, including info that foreshadows the ending, and the Black Hole Forge, which can give you a hint on how to get inside the Ash Twin Project, which you'll need to do to finish the game. The black hole itself that sits at the center of Brittle Hollow also serves as a key in its own way, because falling into it will send you in front of the White Hole Station, which will most likely be your first exposure to Nomai warp technology, and you'll need to understand how this technology works in order to reach the Ash Twin Project. Brittle Hollow also has the gravity cannon, which hints that there's a way to land on the quantum moon. The Tower of Quantum Knowledge will give you a critical piece of information about said quantum moon, but in order to get inside the tower, you need to realize that as the pieces of Brittle Hollow get sucked into the black hole, that they'll be spit back out by the White Hole Station in zero gravity, allowing you to simply float your way up the tower. There's also the Southern Observatory, which shows the Nomai's attempts to find the Eye of the Universe, as well as revealing the secret to getting past the water barrier on Giant's Deep. So Brittle Hollow contains a lot of info that's critical for finishing the game, but aside from the lore you learn from the Old Settlement and the Hanging City, the importance of most of this info won't become obvious until you have more context to understand it, context that you have to build up in your mind by going to the other planets. On Ember Twin, you can visit the cave system in the dried up lake bed to learn the rule of quantum entanglement, which is the third piece of the puzzle to the quantum moon. In the caves connecting up to the Sunless City, you can find the skeleton of an anglerfish from Dark Bramble by using your scout as a guide. and the Nomai writings around this skeleton will reveal that anglerfish are blind, which is your clue that in order to safely navigate Dark Bramble, you'll need to make as little noise as possible. The sand gradually filling the caves of this planet seems like just an obstacle at first, seeing as they can crush you to death if you're not careful, and they can restrict your access to certain areas. But you can also use them to your advantage and gain passage to places that you otherwise couldn't reach, since the sand can bury cacti that's capable of hurting you. And the most important area you can get to on Ember Twin this way is the High Energy Lab. In this facility, you'll learn that the purpose of the towers on Ash Twin is to act as teleporters connecting various planets in the solar system together, for the sake of making it easier to develop the Ash Twin project using resources from each planet. The Sun Station would have been used to provide energy to the project. Giant's Deep supplied the statues that would have uploaded the memories of the Nomai working on the project to the storage units inside the project itself. Brittle Hollow's Black Hole Forge provided the warp cores for the towers, their respective warp pads, and the Ash Twin project, and Timberhearth is where they mine the ore that completely encases the project, protecting it from the shifting sand and a potential supernova. This means that it's impossible for the player to get inside the Ash Twin project by just walking in, because it was intentionally designed to not have a physical entrance. The High Energy Lab also reveals that each warp tower on Ash Twin was designed to resemble the planets they're connected to, and once you realize that they built towers for the Hourglass Twins, it naturally raises the question, why would you need a tower for warping to Ash Twin when you're already on Ash Twin? And when you combine that with the info you may have learned about how the warp technology works from the Black Hole Forge and the White Hole Station, you'll have everything you need to get inside the Ash Twin project. Once inside, the Nomai writings will clarify any information that you may have missed, and it's where you can get your hands on the project's warp core. Dark Bramble is the most overtly hostile planet in the solar system, and the one you're most likely to thoroughly explore last for that reason. But if you remember what the other parts of the game taught you, about the anglerfish blindness, about how to use the signal scope, about how to use your scout's marker, you can safely find your way over to the most important locations inside Dark Bramble. Feldspar's camp, where you'll learn the trick to reaching the core of Giant's Deep, the escape pod, where you'll learn how to reach the vessel, and the vessel itself. Inside the vessel, you'll find the slot for its warp core, which is currently broken, but can be replaced by the one from the Ash Twin project. You'll also find a device for punching in coordinates, which you can use to input the coordinates for the Eye of the Universe found at the core of Giant's Deep. Fulfill both of these requirements, and you'll go to the Eye and see the end of the game. The game is structured in such a way that it isn't really possible to finish the game, or it's at least highly unlikely that you'll be able to do so, unless you visit every major planet. The only areas you can afford to skip are smaller locations, like the Interloper or the Addle Rock. You probably won't get to the vessel without learning about the blindness of the anglerfish from Ember Twin, because the area you have to pass through to reach the vessel is filled with so many anglerfish, any one of which can kill you easily, that getting past them through sheer dumb luck is virtually impossible. You won't be able to power up the vessel without the warp core from Ash Twin, which you can only get by learning about the warp towers and their technology from Ember Twin and Brittle Hollow. The shifting sand between the Hourglass Twins means that if you just stand around on the Ash Twin Tower's warp platform without understanding how it works, the sand will sweep you away before you can get warped to the Ash Twin project. You have to know that you need to step on the platform when the tower is in orbital alignment with the gravitational center of its target, which is when the warp platform is directly in the middle of the sand column. And you won't be able to go to the Eye of the Universe without learning its coordinates from Giant's Deep, because the vessel's device for inputting coordinates has so many possible combinations that brute forcing the answer isn't a viable option, because it would take forever. You also aren't likely to discover everything a planet has to offer on your first visit, not just because of the 22-minute time limit, but also because a lot of areas won't become accessible until you've explored other planets first, or learned how certain phenomena work. You're not likely to see everything in Giant's Deep, including its core, if you haven't also gone to Brittle Hollow and Dark Bramble. There are ways to use quick reflexes and outside-the-box thinking to get to the Black Hole Forge, but the intended method of getting there requires using the Brittle Hollow Warp Tower on Ash Twin. On Ember Twin, you won't be able to explore its deepest caves until you understand the way the shifting sand works and arrive at those caves early in the time loop before they get filled up. It's for that same reason that you won't be able to reach many of Ashtwin's warp towers until the sand subsides, and in the case of the Sun Station's tower, reaching its warp platform requires arriving at the tower when the sand is low enough to reveal the entrance, but still high enough to bury the cacti blocking the way to the lift. To survive in Dark Bramble, you'll almost certainly need to visit Ember Twin, and even though you can theoretically learn about the duplicate signal trick for the scout by yourself, you're more likely to learn it by going to the Bramble Seat on Timberhearth, where a character will suggest launching a scout in there to see what's inside the seed. You can also speed up the time it takes to get to some areas by familiarizing yourself with the layouts of each planet. While exploring the Sunless City on Ember Twin, you might find a hidden shortcut that will take you straight to the planet's surface, so that you don't have to weave your way through quite as many underground tunnels to find the city again, which will save you some time, making it easier to get to certain locations before they fill up with sand. On Brittle Hollow, there's a similar shortcut for quickly getting into the Hanging City, up on the planet's north pole, hidden among the flowing water. All these design choices I've talked about force you to explore the game thoroughly, which means that even if you only intended to stick to the critical path, you probably will end up visiting most of its optional areas, simply because the critical path is invisible, and exploration is the key to progression. To map out the structure of the game, I borrowed the graph design that Mark Brown used in his Boss Keys videos. The one thing about the structure of Outer Wilds that immediately jumps out the most to me is just how non-linear and open-ended it actually is, especially by Metroidvania standards. The graph is extremely short and wide, whereas most Metroidvanias are more tall and thin. Even games like the original Metroid and Symphony of the Night are more on rails by comparison. A more hand-holdy game in this genre can feel claustrophobic in its linearity, especially early on when you have fewer abilities, but Outer Wilds almost suffers from the exact opposite problem, with it starting out as being so open that it can arguably feel agoraphobic. I spent the first few hours of the game feeling overwhelmed and confused, because there were so many places to visit, and I was trying to absorb so much new information from the Nomai writings, which I didn't have much context for. I don't know if that was necessarily the way the game wanted me to feel, but in a way, I think it's still weirdly appropriate anyways. It kind of captures the feeling of being dumbfounded by the magnitude and complexity of our universe, which makes the process of figuring things out and learning how it all connects together all the more satisfying, because you remember how lost you felt at the beginning. But the main reason why Outer Wilds is as non-linear as it is, I think, is because of the way that the game uses its structure to achieve very different goals in comparison to other Metroidvanias. In a game like Super Metroid, most of the excitement for finding a new upgrade comes from the things that upgrade allows you to do. You will have likely already encountered roadblocks to your progress that said upgrade will now allow you to bypass, like when you find the high jump boots and realize that you can use them to jump up to the ledge to the entrance of Kraid's lair that might have frustrated you earlier, or when you find the power bombs that let you open yellow doors, and you realize that every yellow door in the game you've had to walk past can now be opened up. Finding a new piece of information in Outer Wilds can sometimes give a similar feeling, like when you figure out the secret to getting past the electric barrier keeping you from entering the core of Giant's Deep, but more often than not, figuring out how to bypass an obstacle feels more like you're simply solving a puzzle. It's rare for a single key to open multiple locks, unless it's either a tool with broad applicability like your scout or signal scope, or if it's a piece of information used for exploring a larger area, like figuring out how to use the shifting sand on the Hourglass Twins to your advantage, or knowing how to deal with the anglerfish inside Dark Bramble. Because of this, you rarely ever get the feeling of finding a key and thinking to yourself, oh boy, I can't wait to use this on all those locks I found. In fact, because Outer Wilds is as non-linear as it is, it's entirely possible that you'll find a key before you even know what lock it's used for. This happened to Joseph Anderson in his playthrough of the game, when he found out the trick to bypassing the electric barrier on Giant's Deep before he ever went to Giant's Deep.
Alright, so use the jellyfish to insulate from electricity, but... So is this just a hint on how to get down into Giant's Deep? Like, this is it?
Not only that, but a lot of the information you'll find in the game won't help you to reach new areas, and on your first playthrough, it's impossible to tell the difference between info that will act as a key and info that's just there to flesh out the universe or reveal more of the story. Plus, even if a scroll or projection stone or recording doesn't help your exploration efforts directly, it can still hold clues to point you in the right direction, like how the brittle hollow projection stone inside the construction yard on Giant's Deep hints towards the cyclone trick. Because of that, you have no choice but to treat all knowledge as potentially holding equal value, which encourages you to seek out every scrap of info you can find in the hopes that you'll find another piece to the puzzle that will bring you one step closer to making sense of everything going on. This means that the separation between the story and the gameplay is far less stark than in many other games, because in the moment to moment gameplay, the process of finding out what's happening in the narrative and finding out how to finish the game are inextricably tied together. It also means that you don't go hunting for knowledge specifically to unlock more areas. You go hunting for knowledge in order to learn more about the universe in general. That's why, even though Outer Wilds is kind of structured like a Metroidvania, it rarely ever feels like most other Metroidvanias because its actual design priorities are completely different. The point of a traditional Metroidvania is to create an arc of power for the player, where you start off feeling weak, but as you explore and find more items, you gradually become stronger and more familiar with your surroundings, which gives you a feeling of growth and mastery. In Outer Wilds, you do become more familiar with the game's solar system as you play, and learning how things work can certainly be empowering in its own way, but the game isn't a power fantasy. In fact, it's arguably the exact opposite, with its story, its time loop structure that sees you dying and failing to save your solar system over and over again, and just its sheer sense of scale at times, all ultimately requiring you to accept your own smallness and relative powerlessness within the cosmos. Instead, it's more about the value of exploration and finding knowledge for its own sake, and the game is designed to persuade you to recognize that value. Outer Wilds doesn't just convince you to go hunting for information for gameplay reasons, but also because the writing itself is fun to read. The Nomai characters don't just deliver exposition, but they also have families and relationships. They make silly puns. They debate each other over the ethics of their actions. They express anxiety over the weight of the responsibilities on their shoulders. It would have been easy to just have the Nomai writings be anonymized and written from the perspective of the entire race, like Metroid Prime did for the Chozo, especially since the Nomai are literally a bunch of science nerds, so it would have made sense if all their writings were super dry and academic and lacking in personality. But the game is better for not taking that route, because humanizing the Nomai makes it easier to connect to them on an emotional level. But even so, there are ways that the presentation of the Nomai writings could have been improved. All you have to go on for all the Nomai characters are just their names and pronouns. We never hear their voices or see their faces, and there are at least 3 dozen or so named characters to keep track of, which is kind of a lot to ask in a game that also expects you to solve the complex puzzle box that is its solar system. As a result of this, I had a pretty hard time remembering who's who. I could recall many of the names by themselves, but I couldn't tell you exactly who did what, or who was related to who, or anything so specific. This could just be a me problem, but considering someone on Steam felt the need to create an entire guide explaining the relationships between all the Nomai, it's probably not. I respect the fact that this can't be an easy problem to solve, though. Adding voice acting might not have been an option, considering this is an indie game and they likely didn't have the budget for that. Plus, voice acting isn't always the best medium for delivering information anyways. But I'm not convinced that the problem is insurmountable. Maybe each individual character's writing could be associated with a specific color, like the subtitles in Telltale's The Walking Dead. But then again, maybe the developers thought of that and decided against it, to keep the Nomai writings consistent with the look of the rest of their technology, and there are a ton of characters anyway, so they probably would have run out of distinct colors pretty quickly. Plus, there are already some Nomai writings that are in orange instead of blue, though I could never discern the reason why this is. Okay, so maybe each character could have a unique style of handwriting to help set them apart. The game kinda does this a little bit. Some of the writing that was made by or for children looks a lot larger, presumably to give the visual impression of their writing being easier to read, which is a cool detail, don't get me wrong, but I wish that there was more variation in the writing like that. Or maybe each character could have their own unique symbol they put at the end of their writing swirl, like a signature of sorts. Or maybe the game could have used some combination of all of these ideas to make each character's writing as distinct as possible. Maybe none of these ideas would completely fix the issue, but I think they would at least go a ways towards alleviating it. People often compliment games like Dark Souls for having a strong sense of ludonarrative resonance, but you can completely ignore the story in that game by skipping every cutscene and all the dialogue and refusing to read any of the item descriptions, and you'll still be able to get to the end. You can treat Dark Souls as though it has no story and still finish it. You cannot do this for Outer Wilds, because trying to finish the game while ignoring its story is practically impossible, at least if you're going into it unspoiled. Many of the core gameplay systems and mechanics that you need to understand to end the game are inextricably tied to their role in the narrative. If you're not paying attention to the Nomai writings that serve to inform you about the history of their civilization in this solar system, then you have basically no hope of solving the game's puzzles without cheating, because those puzzles are the mysteries in the story. There is no separation between the two. Figuring out what the Ash Twin Project is, what it was designed for, and how it works is both one of the biggest puzzles you have to solve, and it's the narrative's biggest mystery. Dark Souls may be a game where the story complements the gameplay, but Outer Wilds is a game where the story is part of the gameplay. They're both talking about the same themes and conveying the same messages. The desire to understand, to explore, to learn what's out there, is the animating force that drove both the Nomai and the Hearthian peoples, and it's what will have to drive the player also. You can't beat the game if you don't try to adopt the same mentality as the scientists and explorers who came before you and pave the path forward. Knowledge built on top of other knowledge, and just as quantum imaging and quantum entanglement are both built on top of basic quantum mechanics, so too are the lessons you discover as the player built on top of the discoveries of the Nomai, since you would have never found the Eye of the Universe were it not for their creations. And when you reach the Sun Station, a structure that was built to power up the Ash Twin Project by causing a sun to go supernova, hoping to prevent your sun from dying and saving your solar system, you make the discovery that the Sun Station didn't work. And the only reason your sun explodes at the end of every time loop is simply because it's reached the end of its natural lifespan. In other words, there is no way to prevent the death of everything you know, and to allow the loop to continue is to just delay the inevitable. But of course, the only way to get to the Eye of the Universe and end the game is to take the warp core from the Ash Twin Project, which will shut the project down and prevent it from sending your memories back in time, thereby ending the loop. So to finish the game, you have no other choice but to willingly let your solar system die, and by extension, let every solar system die, since it almost certainly won't escape your notice by this point that it's not just your sun that's going supernova, it's all the suns, because you're on the cusp of the heat death of the universe. But the Eye is an entity in quantum flux that's older than the universe itself, because it exists outside of time and space as we understand it. And the reason why the Nomai couldn't find it is because it was technically in countless locations simultaneously, at countless different moments in time. Its spatial and temporal position didn't get locked in until their probe observed it, just like all other quantum objects the player can observe throughout the game. And once you entered the Eye as an observer, your observation collapsed all the infinite possibilities for another universe down into one, and caused that new universe to be born. You don't get to save the universe you knew, and you may die in the new Big Bang, but it's only because of your actions, because of your quest for knowledge and understanding, that that new Big Bang was allowed to happen and create any universe at all. You paved the path for the future, just as the Nomai once paved it for you. It's an ending that brings the themes of the game full circle, by having the player finish the work the Nomai started, and then passing the torch to those who will come after.